Hello, everybody. Welcome to Expand Your Workforce with Apprenticeships webinar. We're going to wait just a moment and give people a chance to log in. A few housekeeping notes. This is a webinar, so this meeting is being recorded. You can submit questions in the Q&A box. Everybody is on mute except for myself and our wonderful presenter, Adele Burns. And we will, oh, I already see a question, great. There are no handouts. The question was, will there be handouts? There are no handouts, but the recording and the presentation slides will be sent to attendees who registered for the event, and they will be available on MBEP's website. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to do some introductions. We've got a poll question. We're going to cover a lot of information about apprenticeships. And then we'll close with some information about what's going on in our region and some case studies and next steps. And then we'll have two sections for Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box now, and we will get to those halfway through our presentation and then at the end of our presentation. And anything we don't get to today, we will be recording questions and we can also follow up to attendees. So I'm Haley Mears. I'm the Workforce Development Program Manager with the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership. And I'm very pleased today to have Adele Burns, the Regional Director of Apprenticeships with the Bay Area Community College Consortium, joining us. Adele joined us last year for our apprenticeship workshop that we did virtually in September, and it was her second day on the job. So we're excited to have her back this year. She's got a little bit more time under her belt in this new role, and she's going to do an amazing presentation on the return on investment and how to set up apprenticeship programs. Before we get started, we'd like to launch a quick poll just to gauge with our audience, like how well you're familiar with apprenticeships. And so if we can get the poll question launched, go ahead and submit your answer there. And I'll read it out loud. So apprenticeships, what is an apprenticeship? Is it an internship with pay, a system in which workers train on the job, earning wages and do productive work while also taking courses related to jobs, an indentured servitude, paying below minimum wage, or I don't know, that's why I'm attending this event. So we'll go ahead and great. So we've launched the poll and now we're sharing the results. So most people answered it's a system in which workers train on the job, earning wages and doing productive work while also taking courses related to the job. And that sounds like the correct answer, right, Adele? All right, thanks so much for humoring us with that. I'm just going to quickly explain a little bit about the difference between apprenticeships and internships. So many of you may know that the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership hosts the Monterey Bay Internships portal, and we're huge supporters of internships and setting up internship programs. However, we also are huge supporters of apprenticeship programs. And so we wanted to bring this presentation to you today to help everyone get a little bit more knowledgeable about the difference between these two work-based learning types of programs. So you can see here on this slide, it's breaking down the difference between a registered apprenticeship and a typical internship. They serve different purposes. Typically, an internship is a short-term work-based learning opportunity where a student may get a stipend or it may even be unpaid, or they're getting academic credit. They're usually affiliated with an educational institution, and they don't receive any type of certificate or degree or any type of credential when they're done with their internship. Whereas a registered apprenticeship is actually a really amazing tool to cultivate a talent pipeline for employers. They actually will be working with somebody who may be enrolled as a regular employee and then is also doing this earn and learn model. It can be up to a year. That's including with all the training that they do. And there are credentials and certificate of completion processes for apprenticeships. And again, it may be affiliated with a college, but Dell is going to go into a lot more of the nuts and bolts of how this all works. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Adele.
Lovely. So good morning, folks. Thank you so much for joining for this conversation. I hope to demystify apprenticeship a little bit for you all, although I'm glad from the poll question, you already have a sense of some of the core definition of apprenticeship. Just to introduce myself a little bit further, I am the Regional Director of Apprenticeships for the Bay Area Community College Consortium. So that is a regional consortium that has the 28 community colleges of the Bay Area. And my role as Regional Director of Apprenticeships is to try to help expand apprenticeships to lots of different sectors. And apprenticeship is traditionally is really a talent development mechanism that's been utilized a lot in the building trades and also the fire trades here in California. And I'm working to expand it to a lot of different occupations, from tech to healthcare, business. There's a lot, I think really you can bring apprenticeship to any sector. And so I'm really excited that you're taking the time to join this conversation. So let's start with just defining a little bit of what is apprenticeship. So if you go to the next slide, the core, like at the beginning and end of the day, it really starts and ends with the employer, because an apprenticeship is a job. And as the employer, it ends up being a customized talent development strategy for you all. And there's been a huge emphasis on apprenticeships in California specifically, but you're also going to hear it a lot just on the national level, because it is an incredibly effective and equitable workforce development mechanism. And as a result, there's a lot of funding flowing in this direction. And for you as employers, that means that this ends up being a heavily subsidized strategy for developing talent. And that's especially true when done in partnership with the California government and the community college system. So I'll unpack this a little bit more, but fundamentally, this is a way to expand your workforce, which is why we gave this session this title, because you should think about it as a talent development strategy. So on the next slide, Haley. So what is a registered apprenticeship? Fundamentally, it's a job. It is a full-time job, but it's also a structured education and training program. And the core components of it are an on-the-job portion, which is typically around 2,000 hours, which works out to be about a year of full-time work. And that is complemented by classroom-based instruction. And you'll sometimes see this acronym in the apprenticeship space of RSI, which stands for Related and Supplemental Instruction. Really what it's referring to is the classroom-based learning that comes along with apprenticeship. And it has to be a minimum of 144 hours, which works out to be about 3 lecture courses. And there's lots of different apprenticeship programs out there. You can design one how makes sense for your company and your occupation that you're apprenticizing, so to speak. But these are sort of the core building blocks. However, at the beginning and of the day, it is a job, right? An apprentice is a full-time paid employee of the sponsoring company. And so you should think of it as like a new job category that is a new pathway into your organization that's just structured a little bit differently than maybe the 4-year degree requirement that you might previously have had. So go to the next slide. So just the related and supplemental instruction part, it's definitely, like I said, it is classroom-based instruction. So the curriculum gets approved, but it is developed in partnership with you all as the employer, because the idea is that you're training somebody really specifically to work at your company and to do this particular occupation. And that's the idea, is that it's instilling a thorough understanding of the occupation and really helping people upskill, both through that on-the-job learning and this classroom-based instruction. And there's a lot of different ways to structure an apprenticeship program. One way is in collaboration with the community college. And when you do it that way, that also means that your apprentices are getting college credit. And one of the many amazing things about apprenticeship in California is that the education is completely free. It's free to you as the employer, and also importantly, it is free to the apprentice. So that's like one of the ways that the state of California is really investing in apprenticeship, is to fully cover the cost of the training. So you can imagine that as an apprentice, you have a job, you're earning, and you're taking classes that could be building towards a degree, and those classes are completely free. So you can see how this this equation starts to really shift the kind of pathways that we make available to young folks and, you know, people of many ages into a new, either into a new career or into a career to begin with. So on the next slide, dive a little bit more into the on-the-job part, because as employers, it's important to understand what you're signing up for the on-the-job learning part. And in an apprenticeship, you design what's called a work process, which you can think about kind of like a job description, but it's saying, what is an apprentice going to be learning on the job? Because they will be learning by doing, right? That's part of the component of apprenticeship. And there does need to be a designated mentor, which doesn't necessarily need to be their manager, right? It can be somebody who is experienced and holding the role that the apprentice is training for. But they're the person who's really doing that on the job training component, which honestly, you probably already have this built into that like entry level role in your organization, right? So, and then another key component of apprenticeship is that there does need to be at least one step of wage progression. There can be multiple, but there has to be at least one. And you can think about this as sort of mapping to that work process. So what are they learning on the job? And as they learn more, they should have at least one increase in wages. And the wages for an apprentice can start as at as little as 50% of what an experienced person holding that role. So you might hear this term journey person, which is often used in apprenticeship. So a journey person is somebody who's already holding the role that the apprentice is training for. So the apprentice should start off making no less than 50%. The floor is still minimum wage. So I was very glad to see in the poll that nobody thought that this is an opportunity to pay people less than minimum wage. Minimum wage is still the floor, but somebody can be making as little as 50% of what a journey person makes. And then the idea is that with the wage progression, they should be progressing to be making somewhere around 90% of what a journey person would be making on the job. So these are really the core components of the on-the-job portion of things. But as you can see, it's not heavy requirements that's that much different than what you might be doing with the entry-level roles in your company. On the next slide. So there's a few different types of apprenticeship programs that you can design. If you are already familiar with apprenticeship, you are likely familiar with this time-based model. And this is where, you know, an apprentice logs a certain amount of time on a job, right? So, and for the time-based programs, there's a minimum of 2,000 hours of on-the-job time, and that 144 hours of RSI, which is the classroom instruction. However, there's a new type of apprenticeship program called a competency-based program, and that can be as little as 6 months in duration. So it has to be at least 1,000 hours of on-the-job time. But more importantly, the progression through the apprenticeship is actually measured based on demonstrated competencies as opposed to hours on the job. And I think that this can be a really great program to explore, especially when there is like a third-party examination that can validate the competency. So for example, like a CompTIA certification is sometimes used in a like IT help desk apprenticeship, or I'm working on an apprenticeship in opticians where there's something called a an ABO examination, and that can demonstrate the competency of the optician learning a certain skill set. So there's now this competency-based program, which I think is great because we're creating more flexibility in the apprenticeship system so that you can be designing a program that makes sense for you as the employer. And then of course, there's this hybrid program, which can be sort of a combination of the two above. If you go to the next slide. I'm very excited to report that lots of studies have been done. This one in particular was done on the return on investment on apprenticeship by employers. And employers are seeing a significant return on investment. So for every dollar invested in apprenticeship, it returns $1.48. So a really positive ROI on this. And where employers are really seeing this value is in the upskilling of existing talent, which increases productivity, but also really important in the retention of talent, right? And so it's lowering that turnover rate, which lowers the cost of recruitment. We're all trying to keep great people, and when you invest in people, they stick around. If you go to the next slide, this is a stat that's showing that 94% of employees said that they would stay at a company longer if it invested in their career development. And so an apprenticeship is really, it's a way to create this learning and learning by doing environment where you're investing in upskilling folks. However, I will say that that ROI study was not done in California. It was done, if you go back a slide, Haley, this one was actually done in the advanced manufacturing space. And I believe it was done in Michigan. The reason I point that out is because outside of California, employers do end up paying for a lot of the training, but actually in California, you do not have to pay for the training. The training is paid for by the state of California. So the amount you have to invest is even lower. So to me, that says that like the ROI is even greater for you as an employer in the state of California. So if you go 2 slides, Haley. So I think that the big benefits to employers of doing an apprenticeship program, of setting one up, is that it's recruiting and developing a pipeline of skilled workers, right? So it's getting people trained specifically for your company and for your job. The program gets designed specifically to your operational needs. An apprenticeship definitely at the end and beginning and end of the day is about the employers. And it's been shown to be a really effective mechanism towards diversity goals. Because when you create a new pathway into your company and into careers with your organization, that is an earn and learn pathway, you end up with a more diverse workforce, because the reality is there's a lot of folks out there that cannot forego earning in order to get a degree. And it doesn't mean that they're not hungry and ready to work hard and ready to learn. It just means that they have economic elements that make it so that they have to work. And when you create a pathway into your organization that says like, great, we will hire you. We understand you don't have a ton of experience on day one, but you're going to get experience on the job, and we're going to have you enrolled in these classes that are, building your educational portfolio, training you specifically for this job. You get them started, and thanks to the state of California investing in that training portion, it's all free, both to you as the employer and the apprentice. So it's a really fantastic, I think it's a really fantastic tool, an equitable tool to developing your workforce, and therefore tends to lead to a more diverse talent pool at your company. And importantly, there's cost reduction. So we've talked already about the ROI. I think, the graduated wage scale means that you're paying people commensurate to the skills that they have to begin with. And then as they progress in those skills, they're making more, but you're able to set up a system where it's like very transparent about what you're going to be paid at the different stages. And that also, I do think, can keep the cost down. There are, as I've mentioned, there's a lot of funding in general flowing towards apprenticeship. And so you can tap into that funding, especially for the training portion of things. And And as we've talked about, it can lead to lower costs on the recruitment side of things and, lower turnover rates. So you're not spending a lot on those turnover costs. And then finally, it definitely builds loyalty, because when you invest in people, they stick around. When they see that you're helping them upskill in their career, that's really, really meaningful. So I think these are the major benefit to employers. If you go to the next slide, Haley. So right now in the state of California, there are 93,000 apprentices today. And the state has a goal, Gavin Newsom put forth this very ambitious goal of getting to 500,000 earn and learn apprenticeships by 2029. And so there's this big goal put forth. And if you go to the next slide, Haley, it's not just a crazy goal, they're also putting funding behind it. So I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but I think it's very important when we talk about return on investment, we understand, well, what is the investment? What are we asking employers to pay for in this equation? And there are multiple stakeholders that you bring together when putting together an apprenticeship. There are, obviously you as the employer are the critical first stakeholder. There's also sometimes an intermediary, which is the entity that does the sort of running of the program. So, getting it set up, registered with the government, recruiting the apprentices, convening the employers sometimes. And so that's the role of the intermediary. And then there's the training partner, which is, often the community college, but there can be multiple different kind of training partners, and they're responsible for doing the classroom portion. So when you look at the overall funding, you as the employer are certainly picking up the apprentice's wages and benefits, and of course the mentorship, right? I think it's good to expect that you as the employer are going to be paying all of that. The reason for the little sort of squiggly line is because there are a lot of different funding sources for paying for apprenticeship. You don't need to know the specifics of all of these. I would say about 90% of them are for everything that's not wages. Sometimes US Department of Labor grants can be used a little bit for wage subsidies. Same thing with workforce development boards, but not huge amounts to subsidize wages. So just being transparent about that. So you as the employer do need to be ready to pick up the cost of the wages. But of course, you're employing this person and they're with you for at least 6 months, maybe a year. So hopefully they're bringing a lot of value and productivity to your organization, right? I think that comparison that Haley did at the top between internship and apprenticeship is really important. Like, this is not a 6 to 12 week internship where you train them and then basically once they know what they're doing, they're out the door again, right? I think one of the real values of apprenticeship is that apprentices stick around for 6 months to a year. And so they're really bringing a lot of productivity to your organization. And hopefully everybody wants to continue the employment relationship beyond that, although it's not a requirement. But certainly if you're investing in this talent, you probably want to keep it around. So you as the employer have to pay for the wages. However, for the intermediary, there are a lot of different funds for them to tap into. And I'll just say that traditionally the intermediary has been a union. So in traditional apprenticeships, that's often the union. But as we expand apprenticeship to a lot of different sectors, who plays the role of the intermediary is shifting, and there's a lot of sort of opportunity in this space. So there's sometimes workforce development boards can play that role. Sometimes there are nonprofits that play that role. And sometimes community colleges play that role of the intermediary. And so those folks can tap into workforce development boards, different philanthropies and foundations. There's also large grants from the US Department of Labor and the California Apprenticeship Initiative, which you should sort of consider startup capital for apprenticeship, but can be really helpful to getting things going. And then I won't bore you with all of the details about the community college funding and the training funding, but just know that it's paid for. You as the employer do not have to pick up the bill of the training. It is completely paid for. And I've done this little color coding here to just highlight that if you are an employer that is has a national footprint, the sort of lighter colored shading are the pools of funds available, across the US. But the darker shade are specific funding sources that are only available in California. So I think this also gives you a sense of how much the state of California is investing in apprenticeship, and really specifically doing a lot to cover the training portion of apprenticeship. So I've thrown a lot of information at you. Haley, if you want to go to the next slide, I want to pause here and just see if we've had any questions come up. I will share a little bit more of like examples of apprenticeship programs, but I definitely want to take a moment to pause and see if folks have questions about sort of what is an apprenticeship and the mechanics of it.
Yeah, wow, that was so informative. I just love your presentation so far, especially the return on investment slides, which just it's like a win-win situation. So we do have one question coming in. The question is, does the apprenticeship have to be a formal program established by a local community college in order to pay for the education? Is there any in ECE, which I'm assuming they mean early childhood education?
Sure, absolutely. So if you want to go back one slide, Haley. So in an apprenticeship, it does not have to be established with the community college. So the first and most important stakeholder in putting together an apprenticeship is the employer, because this is a job. This is not a training program. This is a job. And so it absolutely has to start with the employer. So in the early care and education space, for example, it would be great to open up the conversation with your local school district, for example, or if there are like major childcare centers, opening up the conversation with the childcare centers. And I will also say that specifically in the space of ECE, there is a community of practice of folks in the community college system who are interested in launching more early care and education apprenticeships. And there's one at San Francisco Unified School District is launching an apprenticeship program in, I think it's called a paraprofessional. It's basically like an after school teacher. And they're launching in the fall. So that's one program in early care and education. Another one, the San Mateo Community College District is also launching one because they actually have a childcare center on campus. And so they are going to be setting up an apprenticeship program there. And then the most well-established one in the Bay Area right now is actually in Berkeley. Berkeley City College partnered with the YMCA of East Bay to launch actually a youth apprenticeship program, which is just apprenticeship, all the things that I've said, but specifically allowing somebody who is 16 or 17 to become an apprentice. So, so these are just some examples in the early care and education space, but definitely like the first step is a conversation with the employers. And certainly it is important to bring in like an educational partner. It's often the sort of generic name is a LEA, which is a licensed educational agency. It can be the community college. It can also be the adult ed. It can be the K-12 system. Basically, any of the entities in the public educational space can be a partner in setting up an apprenticeship. I will say there's definitely been a big emphasis on the community college system because to the extent that you can kind of tap into the training and educational resources already available in the community college system, I think it really makes sense. And I know that a lot of community colleges definitely have early care and education programs, and probably will have more and more as sort of that whole aspect of our labor market gets formalized with further investment from both the federal and state government around early care and education. So I would say definitely go to the employer, but also bring your community college early into the conversation so that you're bringing together these stakeholders. The other entity that I will just name in that ECE space is there's a group called ECEPS, which is ECEPTS. I can't always remember what it stands for, but it is an intermediary. So this role here of the intermediary, there is a nonprofit. So ECEPS is a nonprofit that is supporting early care and education apprenticeships specifically. Randy Wolf is the name of the woman who runs that, and she is fantastic and knows the space really, really well. So those are some directions I would point you to in terms of putting together the early pieces. And you also asked about funding, and I will say that there are multiple funding sources. So in these sort of bottom three here are the ones sort of most directly for the training. So apportionment funding, that's how community colleges are compensated for educating students. And you can use apportionment funding to pay for the training for apprentices. And that's a solid financial equation for community colleges, right? Like a lot of their funding is driven through enrollment. So this is like a win-win for them, right? So you can pay for it through apportionment funding. There's also these specific set of funds called, sometimes called Montoya funds, but other times called RSI funds. And this is specific funding for apprenticeship that's been around for a long time. It works out to be about $6.44 per training hour. And this is how a lot of the like building trades and fire trades apprenticeships, that's how a lot of their training has been paid for years. It can be utilized in different occupations. It doesn't have to be in the building or fire trades, but that's another pot of money that can pay for the training. And any educational entity like adult ed or K-12 or ROP, any of those folks can tap into the RSI funding, whereas the apportionment is specifically for community colleges. And then employment training panel funds. This actually, it's intended for employers. So some big employers will often tap into ETP funds to pay for like workforce training. But there's a specific section of them that's for apprenticeships. And sometimes these funds will flow to the employer, although that then makes it like incumbent on the employer to do the kind of registering and reporting. So sometimes those funds will also flow through the community colleges actually to pay for the training. So those are just some different funds that can be tapped into. So yes, there's funds specifically with the community college, but that's not the only way to set up an apprenticeship.
So to follow up from that, so let's say you have an employer who wants to work with you on this early childhood education apprenticeship. You found some funding through whatever means. How long would it take to like get this up and running if you wanted to register it with California?
Yeah, so I think the part that can be time consuming is just getting the stakeholders to the table. So let's say you came out of this session feeling super fired up, which I hope you are, to do apprenticeship. And you are the employer. That's fantastic because you're the one identifying the job to be apprenticized, so to speak, right? And so your next step could be to reach out to me. I am happy to be a resource to you all. I'm here to kind of help be a navigator in all the different pieces, right, of potentially identifying an intermediary, identifying educational partners. So I'm here to be a navigator to you. So, but I will just name it's the getting all the stakeholders to the table that can take a little bit of time. But once you have the stakeholders at the table, you're putting together that job description, also known as a work process, and you're putting together like a learning plan, essentially. And then you're filing that with the government. It takes about, I think it takes about maybe 45 days for an apprenticeship to get approved by the state of California. And that's because it has to be publicly posted for 30 days for public opinion. And then it gets approved. So that's the time to approval, but you can be setting up everything as you go, right? And so I think that don't think of the approval as too much of like a time block. It's really, I think the time consuming part is really getting the stakeholders at the table, getting the educational component set up and running and going. So I think it probably takes like sort of 3 to 6 months as a general rule to get an apprenticeship going. It can take longer depending on partners, but I think like sort of 3 to 6 months is probably a good benchmark to have in mind.
Okay, thanks. And that's great for everyone to know that Adele is here as a resource for you. And, specifically in the Monterey Bay region, MBEP is available also to help connect the dots as an intermediary and connect you to Adele. With that, we're going to continue with the presentation. Feel free to submit more questions as you have them. And we actually have a poll question, I believe.
Haley, I'm noticing in the chat, there is a question here from Lawrence. So do you want me to do this question and then you can do the poll?
I don't have that in my chat. So maybe.
Oh, okay. So it says, do all the programs to include the ones you've mentioned require approval via California's Department of Apprenticeship? And would you happen to know the difficulty in obtaining an approval for the establishment of a program? Does it vary dependent on the occupation? Okay, great question. So sorry to keep telling you to go back, Haley, but if you go back to that previous slide, the darker colored funding sources, you need to register with the California Division of Apprenticeship Standards in order to tap into these funding sources. And honestly, that's a big reason to register with them. However, you can also register with the US Department of Labor, and actually there's a lot of effort to coordinate between those two entities. So you can now do what's called a dual registration, where you just fill out one form and you're registering both with the state of California and the US Department of Labor. And the US Department of Labor is extremely fast in approving them. They have like a few days to a week turnaround in approving apprenticeship standards. So in general, DOL tends to be super duper agile and responsive. So would you happen to know the difficulty in obtaining approval for establishment of a program? So what I will say is it's very easy to get a program approved by the US Department of Labor. So like, just know that you can do that, and then you'll be able to run with your apprenticeship program, and no worries. California has a little bit of an interesting nuance to registering, which is that they have this public posting period of 30 days. And the reason for this public posting period is because in the expansion of apprenticeships, the folks who have worked very hard to establish those RSI Montoya funds have felt that they don't want just any apprenticeship program to be able to be approved, so that if your program is competing with an existing apprenticeship program, so for example, let's say you were a non-union electrical, that you had some component of electrical and you wanted to have like an electrician apprenticeship program, and you filed that to be approved by DAS, you might get some protests because there probably is an apprenticeship program. I know there's an apprenticeship program set up for electricians, and your program would be competing with that, and they would use that 30-day public posting period to express their protest to your new program. So the result of this is that it's sometimes, if your occupation has a lot of overlap with the building trades, it means that there could be some like protest aspects to it. If you are not in the building trades, you really don't have to worry about this. Like if you're in health or tech or business or or education, any of these areas, it's not going to be an issue. But I just want to be honest that if it's, I think where this gets a little tricky can be in the like advanced manufacturing space. Sometimes like the job descriptions for those can feel like they have a little bit of overlap with the trades, and there can be sort of friction there. So a workaround to that is just to register with the US Department of Labor, and you can keep running and do it that way. But obviously that means that you can't tap into some of these like California specific training funds. Cool.
All right, I want to make sure we have enough time to get through
Yes.
the rest of the presentation. We're going to launch our poll really quick. I see a few more questions. We're going to hold those for the end. We have time, we don't have to end right at 12:30 for those of you who can't stay with us past. We will be sending the recording and the presentation slides to everybody. So we're going to just do a quick poll to kind of check in with everybody and see how you're feeling so far after hearing this presentation. I am either thoroughly intrigued and would like to explore setting up an apprenticeship, somewhat intrigued, but I still have many more questions. I'm going to digest all this information and get back to you. And it sounds really complicated, no thanks. Or this is just really confusing. So we'd love to get your feedback and kind of get a temperature check on where you guys are right now. And we're not done yet, so we're going to keep presenting some more information too. But go ahead and just let us know how we're doing so far. And we'll go ahead and just see where, oh, I can't see the answers yet. Okay, great. So it sounds like most of you, after hearing this presentation thus far, you're really intrigued and would like to explore setting up an apprenticeship, which is great news. We're so excited about that. And we're going to continue on. And as Adele already mentioned, she's also here to help navigate this process for all of you. And her email is in the slide deck, but we can also drop that in the chat for people. Okay, so with that, let's continue on.
Yeah, so I wanted to be sure to give some examples of apprenticeship programs, and also specifically in the Monterey Bay region. So already in the Monterey Bay region, there are some traditional, what I would call traditional apprenticeships already set up. So these are sort of in the building trades. So at Hartnell, there is an electrical construction apprenticeship program. So the occupation is electrician. And at Gavilan College is the Carpenter Training Committee for Northern California. And this is the list of all of the different occupations. So, so as you can see, there's definitely well-established programs that in the trades. And if you go to the next slide, however, interestingly, there's also some new and innovative ones happening in the region. So Cabrillo has an information technology apprenticeship program. And so they have it in IT, cybersecurity, and web development. And I know Cloud Brigade has been one of the employers that has been taking on apprentices. And Digital Nest has also been an important partner. So we will obviously share these slides out afterwards, and I have linked the website to this program if you would like to learn a little bit more about it. But bravo to Terry and the Cabrillo College team that's been setting up this new and innovative apprenticeship. If you go to the next slide, I know there are also some cool new programs that are in development in the region. At Monterey Peninsula College, there's what's called Click Apprenticeships, which is a new effort led by Monica Bell, and she is launching an apprenticeship in medical assisting, which I think is fascinating. And then also the Veterans Transition Center in Monterey County is doing a facilities manager apprenticeship program with JLL. So these are just some interesting examples of some of the new and innovative areas of apprenticeship developing already in your region. Hopefully coming out of this, there will be even more. And if you go to the next slide, this zooms.
Real quick and ask
Oh,
a
yeah.
question. So if I'm an employer in the Monterey Bay region and I just saw this overview of what's already being done at, Cabrillo, Hartnell, Gavilan, and being developed at MPC, and let's say I am an employer who is also an electrician, does it make sense then to reach out to Hartnell College and just hypothetically and say, I also would like to jump into this apprenticeship program as an employer? Or is it like they need to reestablish a whole new apprenticeship program per employer? Does that question make sense? Can you
Yep.
like
Yeah,
piggyback
absolutely.
off
And
our-
yes, so if you are an employer in any of these industries that I just mentioned, so electrical, carpenter, tech, medical assisting, or facilities maintenance, you can absolutely become an employer. And I see Terry's in the chat here, and adding RVS Tech is another employer who's part of this one. So yes, that's part of the beauty. And this is part of why I wanted to share these really specific examples in the region, because you don't have to start from scratch. You can just contact them and sign on and say, hey, I'm really excited about this. I would like to hire 2 IT help desk apprentices. And that can happen without you having to go through the whole process of setting up. You can sort of get plugged into this existing program. And same thing, like if you are, if you go to the next slide, Haley, like if you need medical assistance, I would love to connect you with Monica Bell, who's setting up that program, and I'm sure would love to have more employers signing up. So absolutely, you can just sign on to an existing program.
Great. That is such great news. I'm so excited. I'm just so thrilled you're here sharing with us today.
Awesome. And these are just some other examples of apprenticeship programs in the state of California. So obviously we have a Cloud Brigade on here, which is specifically linked to Cabrillo. But as you can see, some of the big companies in our region, IBM, Amazon, Sony, Google, Palo Alto Networks, all of these folks have already waded into the waters of apprenticeships. So on the right, you can see some of the occupations that have already been developed. So mainframe administrator, application developer, mechatronics and robotics. I think it's really cool to see that Sony is doing IT sales and marketing specialist. There's one actually that's not on this slide, which is Aon is a big global insurance company, and they are launching an insurance apprentice, which is fascinating. But then we also, like both Google and Cloud Brigade, they have different names, internet technician and computer support specialist, but it's IT help desk is really what those are. And I think IT help desk is a fantastic occupation to be apprenticized, so to speak. And I think that can be a really great occupation to turn into an apprenticeship in your organization. And if you go to the next slide, Haley, there's also some really interesting things happening in the civil service apprenticeship area. And I also highlight this also as sort of an example of a range of different occupations. So with the state of California, you see some of these IT, cybersecurity, IT type occupations, but they also have a licensed vocational nurse to registered nurse program, financial services, building manager. So these are some of the occupations that have been turned into apprenticeships at the state level. And I know they've been working with SCIU Local 1000, which is a major union that works with the state, and they've been a fantastic partner in developing lots of different apprenticeship programs. But then also, like at the county level, we're seeing some county level jobs and even city level jobs being turned into apprenticeships. And like I said, I think this IT help desk space is a great one to look at. Can you turn that into an apprenticeship? And actually in San Joaquin County, there's also a youth apprenticeship program where they're getting high school juniors and seniors becoming IT help desk apprentices. So, we all know that a lot of high school students have to already be working and earning, and this is an opportunity to get them like on the job skills that might really build into a high earning career, right? And so I think that's a really interesting. And also, I know sometimes local governments struggle to hire that talent, the IT help desk. So I just offer these as some ideas, hopefully points of inspiration to consider developing apprenticeships in. And I think, Haley, that's my last slide.
Yeah, Okay, we do have
So,
a few more questions coming in, so I want to make sure we get to those. That was just so great. Thank you. That was so much to just kind of absorb and think about. And I'm assuming everything you just mentioned, since it's already developed in the state, it should be fairly easy to get it approved and have that, done locally as well.
exactly.
Um, okay, a few
And folks
questions.
that you can learn from, right? That's a
Yeah,
lot of what I do is connect folks. So if you are interested, I'm happy to connect you to the folks already running those apprenticeship programs, and so that we can all just be like trading notes and learning from each other.
absolutely. Yeah, no need to reinvent the wheel if someone's already got an established program. Some of the questions coming up are the larger local healthcare providers receptive to apprenticeship commitments? And I'm imagining that question may be coming because a lot of times you can't do a health or hospital internship, because of all the
Mhm.
confidentiality. But
Yep.
I would assume if they're an employee, that shouldn't be a problem, but I'll let you answer that.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of really interesting work around expanding apprenticeship in the healthcare space. And it's in the healthcare space, it's also really interesting because they already have this concept of working, of learning on the job, right? With clinicals, like that's already a component of the education. But it's also a little funky because sometimes people don't get paid for doing that work. Like they're on the job and they're not necessarily being paid. So I'm really excited. I've been partnering a bunch with Nanette Salveson, who's the regional director of health for the Bay Area, for the same organization I'm part of, the Bay Area Community College Consortium. And she and I have been collaborating a lot on expanding apprenticeships in health. And to answer your question, employers are, some of the big employers are definitely getting into apprenticeship, like Kaiser, Sutter, a lot of those big employers, they already have apprenticeship programs. I know specifically Kaiser is working with the SEIU UHW, so the United Health Workers Union, is already partnering with, I think it's Kaiser, Sutter, and Dignity Health are all wading into the world of doing apprenticeships. And the occupations in health that I've seen most, sort of changed into apprenticeship are, so the licensed vocational nurse to registered nurse, the medical assisting, dental assisting, optician, community health worker. I think those are the sort of 5 occupations off the top of my head in the sort of health space that have already been turned into apprenticeships. I will also say I've been doing a whole sort of apprenticeship in health learning series in partnership with the statewide health workforce initiative. And we're sort of halfway through a 5 or 6 part series of webinars specifically on apprenticeship in healthcare. So if you're interested in that, please email me and I'll send you the recordings of the sessions that we've already had. And of course, be sure to loop you into the future conversations. We've talked already about sort of an introduction to apprenticeships, but then also looked specifically, had a session on the dental assisting program being launched at Foothill. And the Foothill Dental Assisting Program is like the employer demand for that is remarkable. There's like 50 employers just in the sort of Foothill College region in the South Bay that are all clamoring for this talent, that have signed up for a dental assisting apprenticeship. So we did a session on that and also a session on the LVN to RN. And actually in a week or two, we're going to have a roundtable that's inviting folks in the folks who are launching programs in community health worker, optician, and I'm forgetting the third at this moment. But anyhow, if you're interested, let me know and I'll loop you into that so that you can learn more specifically about healthcare apprenticeships.
Great. It sounds like there's a lot of interest. So we can even maybe send that information out when we send out the recording and the slides for this presentation. I wanted to follow up a little bit on pre-apprenticeship programs. That's something that came up recently in a meeting, and I was hoping you could maybe clarify to this group what is a pre-apprenticeship program versus a regular apprenticeship program?
Sure. A pre-apprenticeship program is really a training program specifically to prepare folks for an apprenticeship. So you should think about it as exclusively training, right? An apprenticeship is a job with education that complements it, whereas pre-apprenticeship, it is just 100% training. Now, there's quite a lot of flexibility in how a pre-apprenticeship program is set up. It can have components of work-based learning or sort of visit a job site to kind of learn what it really looks like. But for the most part, a pre-apprenticeship program is just training, and it's preparing somebody to get into an apprenticeship program. And I think it's a mechanism that can be really fantastically used to try to get underrepresented populations into an occupation. So for example, I know this really great nonprofit called Love Never Fails that's trying to get women who've been formerly sexually trafficked into tech apprenticeships. And so it's a training program that has like components of the tech, but it's also got a ton of wraparound supports of just like life supports, but also professional coaching, help, like how do you interview, how do you set up your resume? And so I think that programs like that can be really fantastic for helping people get in the door for an apprenticeship, because an apprenticeship, it is a job that you do have to interview for and get the job, right? Now, it's a job hopefully that's designed to be more equitable and accessible to lots of different folks, but it is still something you have to interview and get the job. And so I think pre-apprenticeship programs can be really, really helpful for helping people like be prepared to get that apprenticeship job.
It's kind of like taking a college prep class to get into college. and
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It is.
That helps me make sense of it. That actually what you just said kind of plays off one of the questions we have. So let's say you did a pre-apprenticeship program, you're a student, and then so the question was, does the employee simply state they are part of an apprenticeship program to get their units paid for? So I'm assuming the question is kind of like, if you're the employer, you're the student, and you land an apprenticeship, like what do you do? How do you, or is that a conversation between the community college and the employer? If you're the student / employee, is it your duty to like let them know you're enrolled as an apprentice, or how does that process work?
So this is talking about apprenticeship, not pre-apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when somebody becomes an apprentice, they are hired by a company and they are being sort of enrolled in a program, I'll say very broadly, right? And it's typically the person coordinating that program. So usually like the intermediary who is doing that like coordination behind the scenes with the training partner. So let's say, Cabrillo College is the training partner, then the person organizing the apprenticeship program is going to be coordinating with Cabrillo to say like, okay, so here's my list of apprentices, they're enrolling in these courses this semester. So, don't charge them because they're apprentices, right? And so it happens more in like the coordination behind the scenes.
So if you're a student, you would know I'm applying to be an apprentice in this program, and the employer would know we're seeking an apprentice. So there's no miscommunication. Like you don't show up and say, I want to be an apprentice to a regular job.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean,
yeah.
An apprenticeship is a job, like they get posted as jobs. So for example, like Tesla is doing an apprenticeship. And if you just Google Tesla apprenticeship, you'll find their like tool and die apprenticeship listed on Indeed and, LinkedIn and, different places for people to apply to it. Like it is a job that you apply to. It's not a college course that you sign up for, right? So you have to get the apprenticeship first, and then you get to enroll in the courses that are relevant to that apprenticeship. Terry had a question here. So for healthcare, who are they working with for the training partners? The healthcare examples that I gave, it depends on the program, but the dental assisting is working with Foothill College. So you're thinking, Terry, you're thinking about the SCIU one. So for that one, the LVN to RN program, they're actually working with 3 different community colleges. They're working with Sacramento City, Riverside, and Delta College. So that program is actually, the employer is the California Correctional Services. And it's the LVNs that are employed and by the correctional services in that region that are upskilling to become RNs. And so the educational partners are the community colleges in that context.
Okay, thank you, Adele, for answering all of our questions. We're going to wrap up because we're at time. We just have one more slide. I just wanted to share a few resources. So if you're, hopefully after this, you're totally jazzed and ready to set up an apprenticeship program. But if you're not quite ready yet, I just want to also offer, there are still opportunities to work with students in a work-based learning environment, and you can do that through an internship. We do have our Monterey Bay internships. It's a portal where you can post free recruitments for internships. We have an employer toolkit. It's a very comprehensive guide about how to implement an internship. You can also contact me. And MBEP, we actually host a student ambassador program where we work with interns, and we can even do short-term project-based internships with our MBEP members. So there are some other opportunities if you're not quite ready to set up an apprenticeship program. And I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of that. And so with that, we're going to end. And I just wanted to say thank you for everybody attending and all of your thoughtful questions today. Thank you, Adele, so much for presenting to us and sharing all this information, and also offering yourself as a navigator for us and a liaison, because we will definitely be using your resources and using you to help us in this region get some more apprenticeships going. And with that, I think we'll just go ahead and close. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks all. Thank you.